Hey everybody, this is Will Thompson, producer for Pensado's Place. I recently had the pleasure of visiting with producer Greg Wells and his engineer Ian MacGregor at Greg's studio here in Los Angeles, California. Greg's studio has a really cool vibe and is full of incredible vintage and new instruments, microphones, outboard gear, and it's all centered around a beautiful undertone audio console from Eric Valentine. We thought it would be cool if we showed Greg and Ian's process to drum tracking. So without further ado, here's Greg Wells and Ian MacGregor showing their drum tracking process.
Okay, so on kick, I've got the ATM 25 on the inside. I've got Kel Audio, it's kind of a FET 47 clone sort of thing on the outside. On kind of over the kick and snare, I've got the another Kel Audio mic. Snare is SM57, Beta 57 on top, SM57 on the bottom. Hat, I've got a 451. Often that'll change depending on what kind of sound we want to go for. Toms are both Gefell condensers with pads. And the overheads, or actually the underheads, are Royer 121s, although I like the 101s as well, and the 122s are also great. But being underneath the kit, they're able to kind of capture the cymbal sound in a really unique way. And one really cool thing about ribbons, most of them anyway, is the figure eight pattern, is that while they get stuff above and below the mic, they really reject sound that is to the sides. And you can really use that to your advantage with drums, and that can help kind of, alleviate some phase problems. Because it allows you to really reject certain things that might not be sounding great phase-wise. You're able to really focus in on what you need. So these positions change a lot depending on what I hear in the other room. But for right now, they kind of start there. This is the Royer SF24, which is like one of the best drum room mics available. It's a lot better than the spaced pair, because the spaced pair, you get a lot of phase issues. And you can often get, like, the kick drum will be louder on one side, snare drum will be louder on the other. And when you pan them left and right, it's kind of a weird image. With this mic, you don't have to worry about that. Placement's crucial, but I like to angle it to the side a little bit so that when you're looking straight down the mic, like this, kick and snare are kind of centered up. If you go from this angle, the snare will end up sounding a little bit to one side. And again, this is something that I'll definitely tweak around the room once I get to hear it. So I think that's kind of like where I normally like to put all the drum stuff, and definitely the next step is to listen to it and with the drummer playing and make sure, and I'll definitely come out and tweak a couple times. So the first thing I'll generally do, which I've already kind of done, is I'll go through and I will kind of make sure I have nominal level with all my compressors, all my EQs kind of bypassed and out of the chain. So, if I pull up any of these elements, I've got kind of decent signal. I'm not clipping, everything's working. And sometimes the first thing I'll do is sort of start with the real basic, like kick, snare, overheads, and get that really, really good phase-wise, all the polarity, make sure everything's dialed. And then I'll kind of build everything in around it and make sure everything else is working right. And oftentimes I'll do most of my drum sounds with the console just listening in mono, because sometimes the stereo stuff can trick you with phase. And this way it's really easy for me to tell. If I flip the phase on a room mic or an overhead, I can hear it like right away. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start with kick. This is a kick in. And the kick in mic, I'm using a vintage 1272, and it's then going to a UTA EQ, and then it's going back to a mono optograph, Shadow Hills, kind of a really good optical compressor. The next thing is kick out, and kick out is come through one of these Avitas Brent Averill pre's into the Empirical Labs Little Freak, which is a really awesome EQ, and then into Pro Tools. Sometimes the first thing I'll do is just check and make sure that the kick in and kick out mics are all in phase. And they are. Snare top is going into one of these vintage 1272s, and it's also going to a UTA EQ, channel here, and then it comes back, and I hit the snare top with a distressor, and then into a 550A. And I don't always use the 550A, but sometimes if I need a little extra, like, crunch, or I need a little extra on the bottom, I can go there. But I usually get everything I need from the UTA EQ. I've also got my bottom, which is up here on an Averroll, and then it's going to a 550A. And I want to make sure these are in phase, and usually they're not. You have to flip one of them. And then I'll check out my underheads, which these are the two Royers underneath the cymbals. And these are going through the Avitas Pre's into the R&D 5033 EQ, which is a really amazing EQ, and then into Pro Tools. And the first thing I'll do is just make sure they're in phase, which they're not. So I need to go move those mics around a little bit. So what I just did is when I brought up my underheads, I noticed that they were out of phase. So usually the first thing to do is just go look at the mics and move them around and try and find a place where they can both kind of be in phase better. And what I noticed is I was getting cancellation of both the snare and the kick drum, which is not good. It's not the end of the world if they end up being out of phase. You can always flip it, but you just want to make sure you can get it right. So I'll bring up my kick mic here, everything in mono. I'll actually bring up kick and snare. What I'm doing here is just making sure that kick and snare are really good in phase with the overs. So now I've just got like kick, snare, overs, kind of where I like to have them. No EQ, no compression, anything like that. And now I'll bring in the toms and kind of make sure they're also kind of sitting well with everything. Again, I'll solo the toms out with the underheads. And I'll flip phase back and forth and see what sounds better. One thing that's really important is to, when you're checking phase, like there's not a whole lot, because those ribbon mics, the way they kind of really focus on the cymbals and get rid of everything else, there's not a whole lot of, there's not a ton of toms or kick or snare in those mics. So you have to make sure that you're listening to enough of that signal to hear that it's canceling out. Because if stuff's quiet and you flip the phase, you're not going to hear it. For hat, I just have I don't have any EQ or compression, just a 451. And one thing I'll always check is snare of the phase in the hi-hat mic. It's almost always better. If your snare top is flipped, as it often is, you almost always want to flip this. There's just always more body, and you always have that hat mic, and it's sitting right next to the snare, so if it's out of phase, it's going to screw up your snare sound. Next thing I'll do is check out my room mics. And kind of the first room mic is just that Kel 47 right over the kick drum and snare. And you can almost get the entire drum sound from this one mic. First thing you do is check phase, kick and snare. With this mic, I'll definitely start with some EQ on the UTA. So the UTA can do so many cool things. With the filters, I can even, add top with the low pass filter, which is something that's really cool. And I can also get like a low bump from the high pass filter, getting a little extra air and a little extra kind of bump on the bottom. And I might even add some more low end kind of focused with this guy down here. And then often I will hit that pretty hard, and I'll always go back and check that against with everything. And then I'll go through and start with my stereo drum room mic. And the stereo mic is the Royer stereo ribbon. And I take that mic and I molt it out. It goes into the Avitas Pre's, and then it goes into a pair of 550B's. And then I molt that signal, and I send one stereo pair to this the Chandler EMI limiter, which is good for pretty aggressive like compression and limiting. But then I take another pair, and those go to the pair of the levelers, which is perfect for like extreme like smashing of drums. So the first thing I'll go through is the EMI sound, and then often what I'll do is I'll add just a bunch of low end, and often I'll even shelf off some of the super top stuff so the cymbals don't get really washy. Here's the leveler. Sometimes I can go for more of a crunchy thing, or I I need to check those rooms phase-wise with everything else. And now I'll just kind of go through and dial each thing a little bit more individually. Like I'll add a little more compression on the kick. Might add a little low end to that kick. A little mid-range. A little top end. And all this stuff might get tweaked a little bit once you hear it in the context of the song. Often I'll add quite a bit of like 200 to that snare top. If there's a funny ring in the snare, the UTAQ is amazing for getting rid of that because it can really get dialed. But the snare sounds pretty good. Snare bottom, add a little low end. Can I hear toms? Rack tom needs a little help. Usually I give him a little low end. I'll kind of try and match them up a little bit. If they sound a little like they're in different drum sets or something, I'll tweak them both. And I'll also hit them a little bit with this 5043. And usually at this point, I've got everything kind of ballpark. And at this point, I'll have Greg like play some and come in and check it out because he, needs to hear it and see what he wants to do. Do you want to play some and come in and check it out?
So typically what we would do if I were to drum or anybody were to drum on a song here is what we just did. I'll be out there drumming and getting sounds, and we'll usually experiment a bit with mic placement. And Ian and I work collaboratively with the sounds. Ian's a fantastic engineer, and I also know how to engineer. In between the two of us, we kind of like come up with this thing, and so we overcompensate probably with the amount of mics we use on drums. However, it gives us all the choice in the world, because sometimes I will literally just use one mic on the drums, one of the 11 mics that we've recorded. And this is the result, I have to say, of like years and years and years of experimenting. Even, even before Ian and I have been working together for the last couple of years, just like me learning so much about different drum mic placement things, the sound of the drums themselves. Ross Garfield, who is the famous drum doctor, it just pulls magic out of the drums. I don't know how he does it. He is unbelievable. So whenever I have the budget to have him come and tune, I do, and he's really sort of a magician. So it starts with that. The drums just have to sound great, and the drum kit that we're recording is a drum kit that the amazing drummer Matt Chamberlain, who I get to work with sometimes, recommended to me, and it was up in Seattle at Don Bennett's drum shop, and it's a 1940s Radio King kit. Big 26-inch bass drum. Just sounds like God's bass drum. It may be God's bass drum, which we are lucky to have on permanent loan here. Actually, I own it. I own God's bass drum. The thing I haven't said yet is, because every song is so different, even on the same album, that it's always this process of coming in and like figuring out, okay, well, that really works. Let's chase that a little more. There's way too much. Maybe the tempo's too fast. So, we really are into room mic treatments as we record, and some of them will work great, and some of them won't work at all, depending on the tempo and the vibe of the song. So I would just typically come in and hit play like this. And then start soloing the tracks. One thing that, yet another audio trick that we have culled from the amazing Eric Valentine, is he's really into the technique of putting a 47 or a 47-ish mic over the kick drum. So I want to show you how I like to use that. I'll let you just hear it kind of with nothing on, just as we recorded it. So that's it. Turn it up a bit. However, if we all add some sort of like hilarious amounts of low EQ, like maybe a bunch of 100 hertz or 50, I'm a real fan of the Waves API plugins. So I'm gonna add, I don't know, 6 to 9 dB of 50, and with the mic solid, it sounds like this. And then put a bunch of pretty aggressive compression after it, and I really love the CLA 76. It's a great sounding plug-in compressor. So that gives you a pretty overcooked, sort of almost slightly almost unusable sound. But if you blend that in, it is amazing what it does to the drum sound. You know, what that does to the depth of the toms, the kick drum. It's really, there's no other miking technique I can think of that does that. It's just like, it's magic. And sometimes I'll bring that up for tom fills. There's also something really great about it being a mono mic because, a mono track of just the one mic, because you can turn it up pretty loud with all that compression and even all that rumbly low end EQ. But it somehow just keeps all the definition of the drums in the track as well. Often when you pull up room mics, especially if they're on the washier side, you start to lose definition and you get the sound of the room. There's something about this and the placement of it that just, it's like a drummer's, really, I'm going to say wet dream. It's a bit like that, yes. Good dream?